there's some scuttle out there that actually was more responsible for more of the deaths than the actual contagion was.
Mm-hmm. And I started to hear that early on, that the ventilator was a death sentence. And that was like the worst thing that you could do for the lungs. That should have been a last resort. And it started to be one, like you said, one of the first things that they did when you went into the hospital. Not to mention, and I won't name drug names so it doesn't trigger this video, but
The
there are,
algorithms.
right, right. There's a big drug that's being used in the hospital on every protocol. And that has been shown to cause, renal failure and other organ failure. And that was based on a study where 50% of the people in the study died. But the NIH thought that was the medication that should be on all the hospital protocols. So, I mean, it really blows your mind when you start to think about the way that these protocols were created based on very poor research of the medications that they chose to use and the drugs that were actually saving people. Then you started to see all these articles come out about how dangerous these drugs that had been used for decades, that have a very minor adverse effect profile, how these drugs were killing people. So then none of the mainstream hospitals and clinics, none of those providers could prescribe it. And even my sister lives in Rapid City, South Dakota, and I am licensed in South Dakota, so I can see people there as well. But her husband works in the hospital, and they have put up flyers on how dangerous one of the main life-saving drugs are. They have signs all over the hospital telling people to not prescribe it and not to use it because it's so dangerous, even though this particular drug
in a hospital.
In a hospital. Yep. Even though this drug has been used over 4 billion times, it's just, and has such, I mean, it's safer probably than Tylenol, but they have signs all over the hospital just to warn people not to take it.
But the one that is actually hurting people,
yep,
they're prescribing. They're using as a general course of treatment.
General course, and they get money if they use the protocol. The hospitals get money if they do what the CDC and the NIH tell them to do.
Well, that's because you're a right-wing fringe lunatic who believes in conspiracy theories and probably don't have a real medical or a doctorate. You're just making it all up. Because that's what's being said to so many people now. You question any of this, and they come after your license. Did any of that start to happen for you?
It has not, but
that'll change now.
I know my license has not been jeopardized, but in October of 2021, I was actually visiting my daughter, and I have a grandson, and so I was visiting them, and unfortunately, I had my work emails on my phone, and so I got an email. While I was there, I looked at it, and it said there was a new COOF policy at my place of employment. And so I couldn't open it on my phone because it required some secure something. So when I got home, that was the first thing I did, is I opened up my work computer, went to this new policy, and what I had been expecting for so many months came true. And my husband works out of town for 2 weeks out of every month. So he was out of town. I called him and I said, well, here's the deal. They want me to get tested once a week because I'm unjabbed, and I'm not going to do that, but I need your support, because I was making 6 figures and he makes, decent money, but I was the breadwinner.
Does he work on the Yellowstone?
He works.
I'm making a reference to the TV show.
No, he does not. He works in the oil fields.
I'm sorry. Everybody needs a little bit of John and Beth.
Isn't that so true? Yes. Agreed. Yes.
A little bit more of that in the world, there'd be a lot less bickering.
There would be.
Anyway, I'm sorry.
No.
So you were like, I'm going to lose, we're going to go from pretty comfortable to
hurting. Yeah.
Hurting.
So I wanted I'm not going to do anything. He's my partner. And so, as my husband, he has to have a say in what I do, but we had talked about it, and we both said if either of us had to either be forced jabbed or forced to do testing, we were not going to do it. And so he called and I said, here's the deal. Can I go ahead and start fighting this? And he said, absolutely, start fighting it. And so I fought it for a good month. And I even had my director, I tried to get them to agree to be recorded, but they denied. And in the state of Montana, you have to have everybody's permission to record. So I couldn't record any of the meetings that they wanted to have. But
you guys got to get that law changed.
I know. So in one of the meetings, I even had him agreeing with me that there was really no evidence to support only testing unjabbed. And that at that time, the CDC had even come out and said that the jabs were not going to prevent infection, nor were they going to prevent transmission. And so I said, I'm having a hard time wrapping my brain around how I have to get tested, but I'm no more dangerous than anybody else. And so we went around and around, and I really thought that the Montana bill, the HB 702, would protect me because it wasn't very clearly stated that a non-nursing home facility could institute a policy like this that was very, I mean, it was just completely based on discrimination. And so I fought it. They offered me a religious exemption. I filled it out and said, God doesn't want you to fear anything. So why would I go get tested and have to fear testing positive when I have no symptoms and not be able to go to work or not be able to see my patients? I said, it doesn't make any sense. If I'm sick, I'll go get tested if that's what you really want. But if I'm not sick, why would I go get tested?
Well, it's the first time in the history of the United States where you take people who are apparently healthy, treat them as if they're obviously ill, and then tell them, you have to comply with our treatment of you being obviously ill by testing to prove that you're not ill.
Exactly. I know.
Oh, and by the way, the immunocompromised people, they don't have to stay home, but you do.
Right.
And I'm not advocating that anybody should be forced to stay home, but that's just been what this has been all. It's been just a study in ass backwardness.
Right. No,
terminology.
No, I completely agree. So I went round and around. Eventually, I was given a written warning. They would not let me step foot in the building unless I agreed to be tested. So they took all my patients away in the month of October, would not let me see any of my patients. And I brought up the fact, like, a week ago, you let me in the building. So what's changed between a week ago and now? I'm not sick. I wasn't sick then. I'm not sick now. But there was no common sense to it. And so they terminated me. My last day was November 12th. And I had been praying every night since I was sick with the COOF. And I had this calling to do something with my license and to try to help people. But I couldn't quit my job because I made too much money. And so I kept praying and asking God, if you want me to do this, if this is what I'm supposed to do, then make it obvious, because I'm not going to quit my job. And so when I was fired, it was almost like, well, here's my sign. I guess this is God saying that I'm not supposed to be doing genetics and being miserable because I'm obviously not fitting in with that crowd of people who believe a certain way, and I feel something totally different. And so I started thinking about opening my own practice and thought, if I can use my skills in a different way, get away from this medical system that's not treating people, they're not caring for people right now. If anything, they're harming people by pushing the jabs and being okay that it's being forced on people. And so that's what really started this whole road to starting my own practice.
And there it is, ladies and gentlemen, RockyMountainHealthHealing.org. If you are in South Dakota, Montana, Wyoming,
and North Dakota is pending. And then I'm starting to look at Minnesota because I was licensed there once. And so it should be a pretty easy process to get relicensed. And so I just started that process today.
So check her out and then tell her, if you see this and you're interested in checking her out, if you got something you need, tell her you saw her here,
Yeah.
and I'll get at this. I'm not getting paid to say this, so it's not a paid advertisement. It's like those old deceptive infomercials that look like they're going to be a news program, and they turn into a talk about somebody's, what is it, like Patriot Supply or whatever, for their long-term food shelves.
Right.
So you went and launched your own telemed, and I would assume that the theory of your telemed has gone from being someone who is sick care to someone who's actually encouraging preventative medicine and preventative measures, as well as dealing with sickness.
Correct. My passion. So I have a personal history with migraines and had a cancer scare a few years ago. And so I've always been healthy. But I really started to look into different things, even a few years ago, just for my personal health. And I went from, maybe getting a cold twice a year to like never being sick. Prior to getting the COOF, I had not been sick for probably 3 years. And so I had done that. It was nothing that my primary care provider told me to do. I just started researching things on my own. And so it became kind of a passion to me to talk to people who had chronic diseases and say, what's really happening? What is the root of your problem? Because if you go to the doctor, if you're overweight, they're going to tell you to lose weight, but then maybe you already have high blood sugar and you have pre-diabetes. So they put you on a medication, and then that medication causes some side effects. So they put you on another medication to counter that side effect.
To counter the side effect, which then has its own side effects, which then gets you on another med.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I just started to look. Like, I make my own face cream. I don't buy commercial products anymore. I'm very aware of what's being put in my body. And I was never really aware of, like, I looked at food labels, but I didn't look what was in my shampoo. I mean, why the heck would I care about what I'm putting on my hair? But it's just amazing how many products have very toxic ingredients that we use every single day. And then we wonder why we're not healthy.
She went full circle, ladies and gentlemen. She's gone hippie on us.
That's what my husband.
She's been in Montana too long. She's a crunchy, bunny hugging tree bunny loving tree hugging granola.
That's what my husband tells me. Yes.
I'm teasing. Well, it's actually kind of it's funny in an ironic sense, not a ha-ha sense, but it is actually kind of ironic that many of the people who at one time would have been all on board with holistic health and healing and natural remedies are now the people who aren't the dissidents. They're the ones out there shilling for the system, which is exactly the same system they hated back in the 60s, in the 70s, that they were out there fighting the man, and they have now become the man, and they're shilling for all of this stuff and like wanting to force all of these things on you. And it's odd that the kind of the conservative traditionalists are the ones now out there going, have you considered trying something like vitamin D? Like getting out in the sun. That might.
Right.
Have you considered CBD, or have you considered, whatever you're looking at treating? It's kind of like the radical person now is the person who's also probably like passionately engaged in constitutional work.
Right. Yeah. So true. Well, speaking of CBD, I've battled migraines my entire adult life. Of course, I've had the brain MRIs, and I've been on every prescription medication that has ever been invented for migraines. And even a couple of years ago, I tried one of the new injectable medications. And when you inject something in your body, if you react poorly, you can't take it out of your body. You have to wait until it leaves your body. And I started to have terrible, terrible side effects, ended up in the emergency department. And it was at that point that I said, what am I doing? So I started doing acupuncture and massage and started using CBD, which, 4 years ago, I would have said, oh my goodness, the cannabis plant is the devil and you shouldn't be using it because, that's what I was taught. And I have done so much research on the cannabis plant and all the different benefits to our bodies. And I mean, we have receptors throughout our bodies for components of that plant. It was almost like it was made for us, in some way. And
The heck you say?
What was that?
The heck you say?
I know. So I don't smoke anything, but I use CBD daily. And I went from having, some weeks I was having a migraine 4 days a week. I had such a poor quality of life. And I hardly get a really bad migraine anymore. So I'm a believer that if we can give our bodies what it really needs, we can heal. And I wasn't going to heal seeing my primary care provider. It just wasn't going to happen. And so that's my passion. That's what I want to do for patients. And each person is different and each person's body is going to be different. But I don't want to see a patient every 10 minutes. I want to see a patient maybe every hour, hour and a half, so I can really get to know that person and we can talk about what it means to be healthy. And for each person, that might be different. I mean, my perception of healthy might not be your perception of healthy. And who am I to tell you that your perception is wrong? And so if you can get to a healthy state, whatever that looks like for you, great. That's perfect. That's what I want for people.
Well, I think I appreciate what you're saying. Obviously there are some things that we, like injecting heroin is a bad idea, ladies and gentlemen.
True. Yeah, true.
Well, I feel healthy. You're not feeling anything, frankly.
Right, true.
But I know what you're saying. It's like the idea of the obesity, which of course everything's a pandemic or an epidemic in the United States. We have an epidemic of gun violence, we have an epidemic of racism, we have an epidemic of hate, and we have but the body positivity side of this is, you shouldn't shame anybody for their body. And if you tell somebody they should lose weight, you're hateful. But then you turn around and then medicine says, oh, well, according to our charts and standardization and normalization, you're obese. Well, I'm 6'10".
Right.
And I work I'm a lumberjack.
Right.
I'm like,
right.
I literally I'm a lumberjack, not me, but
right.
Yeah, but it says here you're obese, morbidly so.
Right.
What? And so it's because what you said is we're all different. And yet what modern medicine has done is it has normalized and standardized that everybody should be exactly the same.
Right.
And everybody should have the exact same response to X, Y, and Z. And yet when you turn on TV or even YouTube, because, now ads play on my videos because I'm monetized. So I'm just terrified to find out what people are seeing when they watch my stuff. Probably all like AARP advertisements, because they seem to think that I'm part of the retired community now. But you turn on the TV or you turn on YouTube or whatever it is, and it's ad after ad after ad for this medication or that medication. And then they also run through this really long list of side effects, which more often than not is like, do you have psoriasis? Are you depressed because of your psoriasis? You should take this, and then you won't have psoriasis. Side effects of taking this drug so you don't have psoriasis are suicidal thoughts, depression,
and death, maybe death.
And maybe death. So let me get this. So I'm depressed because I have psoriasis, and if I take the drug, I won't have psoriasis anymore. But I'll still end up being depressed and want to kill myself. Right? So why don't I just deal with the psoriasis, or you just want me to be depressed but have really nice skin?
Exactly. It's so true.
I shouldn't make light of it, but that's literally where we are. And to make it serious, and I know you probably know this, having practice within the system, you want to know why we are in in the place where we are with our methamphetamine addiction in the United States. It's because we were putting, especially boys, on meth, the equivalent of meth. You want to know why we have an opioid crisis in the United States? Because every time somebody comes in with a broken fingernail,
Yep.
our answer is to put them on an opioid.
Yep. Yep.
And then when they get addicted to the opioid, we put them on a synthetic opioid
Right.
to get them off of the opioid. But it's controlled. And so when that doesn't work, then they go out and they get their own opioids. That's why all of these problems, ladies and gentlemen, once again, personal responsibility. If you're addicted, that's your fault in the sense of you should say no. But when you've got a medical professional looking you in the eye and saying, oh, you know what you need? You need fentanyl. Oh, you know what you need? Your kid won't sit still. They need to be on Adderall or whatever the popular ones are now. And we're not looking at individualized treatment. We're looking at group treatment. Oh, this is what works, so this is what the group should be on. And it breaks my heart because that's how we end up in a position now where the doctors and the nurses and everybody else in the medical field, for the most part, other than some of the dissident voices, are all like, oh, yeah, well, the CDC and the WHO and NIH said we have to do all of this, so we must do it because it must be effective. And they have trained those people to go out and be propaganda mouthpieces to attack anyone who doesn't agree. And to say, if you don't agree with me, it's because you're stupid and you don't have my education. You don't have the level of education that I have. And if somebody like you steps outside of that circle of arrogance and pride and says, no, wait a minute, these people have a right to individualized treatment and they have a liberty to not be forced to do whatever it is you want them to do for the treatment, then you now all of a sudden get marginalized and attacked. And as we've seen in many cases, nurse practitioners and doctors and RNs and respiratory therapists and whatnot are all losing their jobs because their credentials are being pulled.
Right.
And they've done no harm.
No, it's extremely hard some days to even understand how we got here. It's extremely hard. And I mean, every day I do worry. Like I stopped Facebook back in 2020 just because I couldn't. Once I woke up to the way things really were, it was hard. I was just making myself crazy. You can't fight with people that are never going to see it. And I wanted to like wake more people up. I had this like desire to have them experience what I experienced. So we were all seeing the world the same way. And that's never going to happen. I mean, it's absolutely never going to happen. So I went off Facebook. And of course, when I started my practice, I have to advertise. And as a telemedicine practice, you know, to get multiple different states and do that type of advertising, you have to do social media. And of course, I was on Telegram and I posted it all over the channels on Telegram, but I just wasn't getting the patients. So I had to go back to Facebook, and my husband did it, you know, on his page, and I made a Facebook page for my business. And of course, then I had to keep my personal one. And I had a girl or a lady that I went to high school with, and she's an RN. And when I posted that I was starting this practice, and the priority at that time was going to be treating COOF because a lot of people were having it at that point, she just ripped me into and pretty much told me that I was worshiping Trump, and did I not realize that he got triple jabbed, and how she was so thankful I was not in her state so I couldn't kill her family by prescribing these medications that are known to kill people, and just went on and on. I mean, I was like speechless, like, are you serious? But it's people like that who have a medical background that are going to call my board and say, hey, look what she's doing, look into her. And that's scary. I mean, and this is a person that lives in North Dakota. I mean, she's not in Washington State or, you know, one of the real blue states. And so it's just, it's, you know, I have that fear every day. What happens to us if I lose my ability to practice? I mean, I lost my job, but I'm trying to make a business, and it's slower than I want it to be, but I know with time that it will pick up. But what happens if they take my license away? I mean, what do we do? And I mean, that's a thought that Goes through my mind every day, all because I'm trying to help people. I'm not hurting anybody. I mean, my decision not to get jabbed wasn't because I was this malicious person that wanted people to die. It was,
You ran into, is Rosar still a thing in Montana? The fancy grocery stores with the carpeted aisles?
oh, I don't know.
No.
Uh,
Tidymans?
yeah, I haven't heard of those.
Really? Wow,
Uh,
they must not have made it that far east in Montana. Um, you're not, it's not like you're running into the local Costco or the Walmart or anywhere else and like coughing on fresh fruit and sneezing
no,
on people and licking door handles.
no,
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 you're not doing any of that. No.
I'm not. No,
You're
no,
not intentionally infecting yourself and going and sitting at sporting events?
no, no,
No. Hmm. Are you
no.
sure? Because you sound like a monster to me.
I know, I know. And when I had the coof, I stayed home. Well, I stayed home more than my 10 days because I was working at home, but I followed the rules just because I don't want to know that I got somebody sick and they died from it. I mean, no healthcare provider goes into the healthcare business and wants to hurt people. And that's why I'm just really torn. I mean, at this point where we are today, I'm not understanding how so many physicians and nurse practitioners and PAs and nurses, how are they still pushing these jabs? I can't wrap my brain around it. And I have to believe in my heart that they just are so asleep that they have no ability to think outside of the CDC and the NIH and what their hospital system is telling them. But then that's scary as well, because if they have no ability to go outside of that box, how do you know when you're going in to see them as a patient that they're going to think outside of that box and not just do whatever the guidelines tell them to do for a specific symptom? And I'll tell you, when I went to the emergency department with that adverse reaction from the migraine medication, I had heart palpitations, felt very lightheaded, had some chest pain, and I knew that I was having some type of heart arrhythmia. And so I went into the emergency department, and of course, by the time I sat down, I could tell that my heart rate had normalized. But I thought, well, I'm here, I'll just go in and have them hook me up and see if anything shows up. And so they did that. The doctor came in, he said, we're going to do a chest x-ray, order some blood work, perfectly fine. Well, they ended up doing a pregnancy test on me because that's part of the guidelines. If a woman comes in with ABC symptoms, we have to do a pregnancy test. They obviously didn't look at my history because I had a hysterectomy. I don't have the parts to have a baby. And so when I got the bill, I didn't even know that they ordered the test. But when I got the bill and I saw that they did a pregnancy test, I called and I said, I'm not paying for this. If the physician would have taken 5 seconds to look at my surgical history, his critical thinking should have said, oh, this is part of the protocol, but she doesn't have those parts, so I'm not going to order a pregnancy test. But that's the problem that we're in, is we are trained to do A, B, C, and D if a person has a certain condition or a certain symptom. And that's what's getting us into trouble. And that's what we need to move away from. We need to take each person and say, what does this person have going on and how can I help them?
Minnesota Black Robe Regiment, you are over the target. You are authorized to fire at